All right, so we are going live today. It is Friday. What is it today? September something or other. I think it's September. Oh, it's September 8th. You know how I know that? It's my son's birthday. So it's Friday, September 8th, and we are starting with chapter 36 of the Count of Monte Cristo, entitled The Carnival at Rome. So far, we've met Franz and Albert, and they have just witnessed an execution that was pretty brutal, and they both passed out because they're young Paris boys and not boys from Italy or Rome. Anyway, so what we're going to be doing now is they are going to be getting dressed, which takes quite a while. They're going to be heading out on the carnival in a cart owned by the Count of Monte Cristo. They're going to have a little meeting with Countess G, and then they're going to go out again looking for some girls to flirt with. And that's what we're working with today. And you'll probably notice that we are working with a different camera angle this morning, and I'm just going to try and see how that goes. I might just mix it up and change camera angles every day. Anyway, with this new one, I'm just noticing that I should probably start wearing a hat. With that being said, it is time for Chapter 36, The Carnival at Rome. So here we go. We are getting everything set up. Make sure our eyes are on. Make sure our mouth is nice and moist and snap free. Make sure our cherry chapstick is in good working order. Our computer is set to record, and here we go. Chapter 36, The Carnival at Rome. When Franz recovered his senses, he saw Albert drinking a glass of water, of which, to judge from his pallor, he stood in great need, and the Count, who was assuming his masquerade costume. He glanced mechanically towards the piazza. The scene was wholly changed. Scaffold, executioners, victims, all had disappeared. Only the people remained, full of noise and excitement. The bell of Montecitorio, which only sounds on the Pope's death and the opening of the carnival, was ringing a joyous peal. "Well," asked he of the Count, "what has happened?" "Nothing," replied the Count. "Only, as you see, the carnival has commenced. Make haste." Ooh, make haste. Let's hit that plosive a little harder. Make haste. "Only, as you see, the carnival has commenced. Make haste and dress yourself." "In fact," said Franz, "this horrible scene has passed away like a dream." "It is but a dream, a nightmare that has disturbed you." "Yes, that I have suffered, but the culprit—" "That is a dream also. Only he has remained asleep, while you have awakened, and who knows which of you is the most fortunate?" "But Peppino, what has become of him?" "Peppino is a lad of sense, who, unlike most men who are happy in proportion as they are noticed, was delighted to see that the general attention was directed towards his companion. He profited by this distraction to slip away among the crowd, without even thanking the worthy priests who accompanied him. Decidedly, man is an ungrateful and egotistical animal. But dress yourself. See, Mr. de Morcerf. Morcerf. I keep wanting to say Morcerf, but it's Morcerf. Here we go. See. Animal. But dress yourself. See, Mr. de Morcerf sets. See, Mr. See, Mr. de Morcerf. Let's rock it again without so much input. Here we go. But dress yourself. Mr. de Morcerf sets you the example. It was the C that was giving me the problem. Yep. All right. Okay. 1 minute and 50 seconds in, and another half hour to go. Yourself. Mr. de Morcerf sets you the example. Albert was drawing on the satin pantaloon over his black trousers and varnished boots. "Well, Albert," said Franz, "do you feel much inclined to join the revels? Come, answer frankly." "Frankly? Answer frankly." "Well, Albert," said Franz, "Well, Albert," said Franz, "do you feel much inclined to join the revels? Come, answer frankly. Come, answer frankly. Come, answer frankly." "Well, Albert," said Franz, "do you feel much inclined to join the revels? Answer frankly." "Goodness, no," returned Albert. "But I am really glad to have seen such a sight, and I understand what the Count said, that when you have once habituated yourself to a similar spectacle, it is the only one that causes you any emotion. Without reflecting that this is the only moment, it does need a change, but it's fine. I don't want it. Without reflecting that this is the only moment in which you can study the character. Similar spectacle. It is the only one that causes you any emotion. Without reflecting that this is the only moment in which you can study character, said the Count. On the steps of the scaffold, death tears off the mask that has been worn through life, and the real visage is disclosed. It must be allowed that Andrea was not very handsome, the hideous scoundrel. Come, dress yourselves, gentlemen. Dress yourselves. Franz felt it would be ridiculous not to follow his two companions' example. He assumed his costume and fastened on the mask that scarcely equaled the pallor of his own face. Their toilet finished, they descended. The carriage awaited them at the door, filled with sweetmeats and bouquets. They fell into the line of carriages. It is difficult to form an idea of the perfect change that had taken place. Instead of the spectacle of gloomy and silent death, the Piazza del Popolo presented a spectacle of gay and noisy mirth and revelry. A crowd of masks flowed in from all sides, emerging from the doors, descending from the windows. From every street and every corner drove carriages filled with clowns, harlequins, dominoes, mummers, pantomimists, transteravans, knights and peasants, screaming, fighting, gesticulating, throwing eggs filled with flour, confetti, nosegays, attacking with their sarcasms and their missiles, friends and foes, companions and strangers, indiscriminately, and no one took offense, or did anything but laugh. Franz and Albert were like, nah. That was a good time to take a solid breath anyway. Here we go. Wet their whistle. Oh. The right spot. All right. One took offense, or did anything but laugh. Franz and Albert were like men who, to drive away a violent sorrow, have recourse to wine, and who, as they drink and become intoxicated, feel a thick veil drawn between the past and the present. They saw, or rather continued to see, the image of what they had witnessed. But little by little the general vertigo seized them, and they felt themselves obliged to take part in the noise and confusion. A handful of confetti that came from a neighboring carriage. A handful of confetti. Neighboring carriage. To take part in the noise and confusion. A handful of confetti that came from a neighboring carriage, and which, while it covered more surf and his two companions with dust, pricked his neck, and that portion of his face uncovered by his mask like 100 pins, incited him to join in the general combat, in which all the masks around him were engaged. He rose in his turn, and seizing handfuls of confetti and sweetmeats with which the carriage was filled, cast them with all the force and skill he was master of. The strife had fairly begun. When you hit your F's. When you hit those F's. Then with all the force and skill he was master of. The strife had fairly begun, and the recollection of what they had seen half an hour before was gradually effaced from the young men's minds. So much were they occupied by the gay and glittering procession. They now beheld. I was expecting a complex sentence, and I didn't get a complex sentence. Young men's minds. So much were... Young men's minds. So much were they occupied by the gay and glittering procession they now beheld. Okay.
Effaced from the young men's minds. Our before was gradually effaced from the young men's minds.
So much were they occupied by the gay and glittering procession they now beheld. As for the Count of Monte Cristo, he had never for an instant shown any appearance of having been moved. Imagine the large and splendid Corso, bordered from one end to the other with lofty places, with their balconies hung with carpets, and their windows with flags. At these balconies are 300,000 spectators, Romans, Italians, strangers from all parts of the world, the united aristocracy of birth, wealth, and genius. Lovely women, yielding to the influence of the scene, bend over their balconies or lean from their windows and shower down confetti, which are returned by bouquets. The air seems darkened with the falling confetti and flying flowers. In the streets, the lively crowd is dressed in the most fantastic costumes. Gigantic cabbages walk gravely about. Buffalo heads. Did I get a breath there? Hold on. We're going to check if we hit breath after gravely about.
Buffalo.
We did. But it's okay. It's a decent breath. It's not a stabbing breath. So we're just going to keep it in. You know why we're going to keep in those breaths? Because there's one thing that AI can't do. Breathe. Here we go.
Costumes. Gigantic cabbages walk gravely about.
Buffaloes' heads bellow from men's shoulders. Dogs walk on their hind legs. In the midst of all this, we're just going to check that transition, make sure it sounds right with the breath.
Bravely about. Buffaloes.
It's just a little shy. It needs to be a little faster. So what we're going to do is we're going to tighten it up a bit so that breath goes right into the next line.
Walk gravely about. Buffaloes' heads bellow from.
Sexy when you get it right. Okay, here we go.
Midst of all this.
In the midst of all this. So we need to cut that and go back over here. Which they now beheld. Oh, there we go. We are right after the semicolon, which kind of means a sentence that is adjourning to another sentence. Here we go. Adjacent to another sentence is what I meant to say.
Dogs walk on their hind legs.
In the midst of all this, a mask is lifted, and, as in Cowlit's Temptation of St. Anthony, Okay, so we're just about to reach a lovely face when the mask is taken off. Okay. Doing good, doing well, doing rockin'.
Dogs walk on their hind legs.
In the midst of all this, a mask is lifted. A lovely face is... In the midst of all this, a mask is lifted, and a lovely face is exhibited, which we would fain follow, but from which we are separated by troops of fiends. This will give a faint idea of the carnival at Rome. At the second turn, the Count stopped the carriage and requested permission to withdraw, leaving the vehicle at their disposal. Franz looked up. They were opposite the Rospoli Palace. At the center window, the one hung with white damask with a red cross, was a blue domino, beneath which Franz's imagination... I just want to make sure we cut the first part.
In the mid.
There we go. Boop-a-doo, doop-a-doo-doo-doo. Make sure the timing's right.
Legs. In the midst was a blue domino.
Was a blue domino. Okay. There we go.
With white damask with a red cross was a blue domino.
Beneath which, Franz's imagination easily pictured the beautiful Greek of the Argentina. Okay, so we're going to change that a little bit. The beautiful Greek woman he had seen at the theater. woman he had seen at the theater, at the opera. Actually. Here we go.
With white damask with a red cross was a blue domino.
Beneath which, Franz's imagination easily pictured the beautiful Greek woman he had seen at the opera. "Gentlemen," said the Count, springing out, "when you are tired of being actors and wish to become spectators of the scene, you know you have places at my windows. In the meantime..." Ooh. I almost want to give him like an English accent, but no.
You know you have places at my windows.
"In the meantime, dispose of my coachman, my carriage, and my servants." We have forgotten to mention that the Count's coachman was attired in a bearskin, resembling. We have forgot to mention. Since I've read this, I've gone back and edited it.
My carriage and my servants.
We have forgotten to mention that the Count's coachman was attired in a bearskin, exactly resembling Audrey's in The Bear and the Pasha, and the 2 footmen behind were dressed up as green monkeys with spring masks, with which they made grimaces at everyone who passed. Gave grimaces to everyone who passed.
In The Bear and the Pasha, and the resembling Audrey's in The Bear and the Pasha.
And the 2 footmen behind were dressed up as green monkeys with spring masks, with which they made grimaces at everyone who passed. Franz thanked the Count for his attention. As for Albert, he was busily occupied. I'm starting to get warm in here already. No.
Franz thanked the Count for his attention.
As for Albert, he was busily occupied throwing bouquets at a carriage full of Roman peasants that was passing near him. Unfortunately for him, the line of carriages moved on again, and while he descended the Piazza del Popolo, the other ascended toward the Palazzo di Venezia. Piazza
del Popolo, the other moved on again, and
Just going to take that section wholly again. See how we do. Boop-doo.
He's at a carriage full of Roman peasants that was passing near him.
Unfortunately for him, the lines of carriages moved on again, and while he descended the Piazza del Popolo, the other ascended towards the Palazzo di Venezia. "Oh, my dear fellow," he said to Franz, "did you not see?" "What?" "There, that calash filled with Roman peasants." "No." "Well, I am convinced they are all charming women." "How unfortunate that you were masked, Albert," said Franz. "Here was an opportunity of making up for past disappointments." "Oh," replied he, half laughing, half serious, "I hope the carnival will not pass without some amends on one shape or the other." But in spite of Albert's hope, the day passed unremarked by any incident, excepting 2 or 3 encounters with the carriage full of Roman peasants. At one of these encounters, accidentally or purposely, this is an important turning point. It's a plot point. You need to pay attention to the plot points. Change your demeanor when that happens. Here we go.
Encounters with the carriage full of Roman peasants.
At one of these encounters, accidentally or purposely, Albert's mask fell off. He instantly rose and cast the remainder of the bouquets into the carriage. Oh, that's why you don't keep water in front of you. God darn it. Gosh dang.
Its mask fell off.
Okay. Actually, that's probably a good reminder then. If we're going to use our hands, we put the water to the side. Okay. Fell off. Here we go.
Albert's mask fell off.
He instantly rose and cast the remainder of the bouquets into the carriage. Doubtless one of the charming females Albert had detected. Ah, dang it. Come on, bud. Come on, babe.
Carriage full of Roman peasants. At one of these encounters, accidentally or purposely, Albert's mask fell off. He's into the carriage. Doubtless one.
Okay, we're just getting a little warm in here. It's starting to get a little fuzzy. Okay, we've been working for 20 minutes. Oh, look at you. Aren't you just the epitome of strength? Okay, here we go. Albert had
Cast the remainder of the bouquets into the carriage.
Ew, cast the remainder of the bouquet? Let's try that again.
Accidentally or purposely, Albert's mask fell off.
He instantly rose and cast the remainder of the bouquets into the carriage. Doubtless one of the charming females Albert had detected beneath their coquettish disguise was touched by his gallantry, for, as the carriage of the two friends passed her, she threw a bunch of violets. Albert seized it, and as Franz had no reason to suppose it was meant for him, he suffered Albert to retain it. Albert placed it in his buttonhole. He put it in his butthole. No, he did not put it in his butthole. He put it in his buttonhole.
It was meant for him. He suffered Albert to retain it.
Albert placed it in his buttonhole, and the carriage went triumphantly on. Well, said Franz to him, there is the beginning of an adventure. Laugh, if you please. I really think so. So I will not abandon this bouquet. Pardon, returned Franz, laughing, in token of your gratitude. The jest, however, soon appeared to become earnest, for when Albert and Franz again encountered the carriage with the lady, the one who had thrown the violets to Albert, she clapped her hands when she beheld them in his buttonhole. Bravo, bravo, said Franz. Things go wonderfully. Shall I leave you? Perhaps you would prefer being alone. No, he replied. I will not be caught like a fool at a first disclosure.
No, he replied.
I will not be caught like a fool at a first disclosure by a rendezvous under the clock, as they say at the opera balls. If the fair peasant wishes to carry matters any further, we shall find her, or rather, she will find us tomorrow. Then she will give me some sign or other, and I shall know what I have to do. On my word, said Franz, you are as wise as Nestor, and prudent as Ulysses, and your fair Circe must be very skillful or very powerful if she... Bang, if she succeeds. So many S's. Okay.
As Ulysses, and your
Minute. Okay. Bop, 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 bop.
and prudent as Ulysses.
And your fair Circe must be very skillful or very powerful if she succeeds in changing you into a beast of any kind. Albert was right. The fair unknown had resolve, doubtless to carry the intrigue no farther, for although the young men made several more turns, they did not see the calash, which had turned up one of the neighboring streets. When they returned to the Rospoli Palace, then they returned to the Rospoli Palace. Not when, then.
Which had turned up one of the neighboring streets.
Then they returned to the Rospoli Palace, but the Count and the blue domino had also disappeared. The two windows hung with yellow damask were still occupied by the persons whom the Count had invited. At this moment the same bell that had proclaimed the beginning of the mascheretta sounded the retreat. The file on the Corso broke the line, and in a second all the carriages had disappeared. Franz and Albert were opposite Via della Murate. The coachman, without saying word, drove up it, passed along the Piazza di Spagna and the Rospoli Palace, and stopped at the door of the hotel. Signor Pastrini came to the door to receive his guests. Franz hastened to inquire after the Count and to express regret that he had not returned in sufficient time. But Pastrini reassured him by saying that the Count of Monte Cristo had ordered a second carriage for himself, and that it had gone at 4 o'clock to fetch him from the Rospoli Palace. The Count had, moreover, charged him to offer the two friends the key of his box at the Argentina. Franz questioned Albert as to his intentions, but Albert had great projects to put into execution before going to the theater, and instead... Franz put Albert to the question. Do you want to go to the opera?
The Argentina.
All right. Franz waterboarded Albert.
Friends, the key of his box at the Argentina.
Franz questioned Albert as to his intentions, but Albert had great projects to put into execution before going to the theater, and instead of making any answer, he inquired if Signor Pastrini could procure him a tailor.
A tailor, said the host. And for what?
To make us, between now and tomorrow, 2 Roman peasant costumes, returned Albert. The host shook his head.
To make you 2 costumes between now and tomorrow. I ask your excellency's pardon, but this is quite a French demand. For the next week you will not find a single tailor who would consent to sew 6 buttons on a waistcoat if you paid him a crown apiece for each button.
Then I must give up the idea?
No. We have them ready-made. Leave all to me, and tomorrow when you awake you shall find a collection of costumes with which you will be satisfied.
My dear Albert, said Franz, leave all to our host. He has already proved himself full of resources.
To our host. He is all... said Franz. Leave all to our host.
He has already proved himself full of resources. Let us dine quietly, and afterwards go and see La Italiana Algier. Agreed, returned Albert. But remember, Signor Pastrini, that both my friend and myself attach the greatest importance of having tomorrow the costumes we asked for. The host again assured them they might rely on him, and that their wishes should be attended to, upon which Franz and Albert mounted to their apartments and proceeded to disencumber themselves of their costumes. Albert, as he took off his dress, carefully preserved the bunch of violets. It was his token reserved for the morrow. The 2 friends sat down to the table, but they could not refrain from remarking the difference between the Count of Monte Cristo's table and that of Signor Pastrini. Truth compelled Franz, in spite of the dislike he seemed to have taken to the Count, to confess that the advantage was not on Pastrini's side. During dessert, the servant inquired at which time they wished for the carriage. Albert and Franz looked at each other, fearing really to abuse the Count's kindness. The servant understood him. His Excellency the Count of Monte Cristo had, he said, given positive orders that the carriage was to remain at their lordships' orders all day, and they could therefore dispose of it without fear of indiscretion. They resolved to profit by the Count's courtesy, and ordered the horses to be harnessed, while they substitute evening dress for that which they had on, and which was somewhat the worse for the numerous combats they had sustained. Somebody's gonna need to take a breath right there. Somebody's gonna need to take a breath right there. Probably me, probably me. All right. We're working it, yeah. Okay, combats they had sustained. Here we go.
But the worse for the numerous combats they had sustained.
This precaution taken, they went to the theater and installed themselves in the Count's box. During the first act, the Countess G entered. Her first look was at the box where she had seen the Count the previous evening. The Countess G entered. Enter Countess G. Exit stage left. Okay.
Countess G entered.
Her first look was at the box where she had seen the Count the previous evening, so that she perceived Franz and Albert in the place of the very person concerning whom she had expressed so strange an opinion to Franz. Her opera glass was so fixedly directed towards them that Franz saw it would be cruel not to satisfy her curiosity, and availing himself of one of the privileges of the spectators of the Italian theaters, who use their boxes to hold receptions, the two friends went to pay their respects to the Countess. Scarcely had they entered when she motioned to Franz to assume the seat of honor. Albert, in his turn, sat behind. "Well," she said, hardly giving Franz, "Ooh. Well." That's not a well question. That's a well, like a well. Okay.
Albert, in his turn, sat behind.
"Well," she said, hardly giving Franz time to sit down. "It seems you have nothing better to do than to make the acquaintance of this new Lord Ruthven, and you are already the best friends in the world." "Without being so far advanced as that, my dear Countess," returned Franz, "I cannot deny that we have abused his good nature all day." "All day?" "Yes. This morning we breakfasted with him. I don't know if I like breakfast as a verb. This morning we had breakfast with him." Okay, here we go.
Nature all day. All day.
"Yes. This morning we had breakfast with him. We rode in his carriage all day, and now we have taken possession of his box." "You know him, then?" "Yes and no." "How so?" "It is a long story." "Tell it to me." "It would frighten you too much." "So much more the reason." "At least wait until the story has a conclusion." "Very well, I prefer complete history." Ooh. "Very well, I prefer complete histories." Don't we all prefer complete histories? Okay, here we go.
At least wait until the story has a conclusion.
"Very well, I prefer complete histories. But tell me how you made this acquaintance." His acquaintance. Gosh darn it, let's try that again. I didn't like the way I said, "I prefer complete histories."
At least wait until the story has a conclusion.
"Very well, I prefer complete histories. But tell me how you made his acquaintance." "Very well, I prefer complete histories. But tell me how you made his acquaintance. Did anyone introduce you to him?" "No, it was he who introduced himself to us." "When?" "Last night, after we left you." "Through what medium?" "The very prosaic one of our landlord." "He is staying, then, at the Hotel de Londres with you?" "Not only in the same hotel, but on the same floor." "What is his name? For of course you know." "The Count of Monte Cristo." "That is not a family name." "No, it is the name of the island he has purchased." "And he is a count?" "A Tuscan count." "Well, we must put up with that," said the Countess, who was herself from one of the oldest Venetian families. "What sort of man is he?" "Ask the Vicomte de Morcerf." "You hear, Mr. de Morcerf, I am referred to you," said the Countess. "We should be very hard to please, madam," returned Albert. "Did we not think him delightful? A friend of 10 years' standing could not have done more for us, or with a more perfect courtesy. Come, observed the Countess, smiling. I see my vampire is only some millionaire who has taken the appearance of Laura in order to avoid being confounded. Oof. Some millionaire.
Smiling. I see my...
You're probably asking yourself why I'm drinking cold water instead of hot water. It's because it's warm in here already. I would bet it's probably like 80, 85 degrees, and we've only been in here, what, 30 minutes? Yeesh. All right, here we go.
observed the Countess, smiling.
I see my vampire is only some millionaire who has taken the appearance of Laura in order to avoid being confounded with Mr. de Rothschild. And have you seen her? Her? The beautiful Greek of yesterday. No, we heard, I think, the sound of her voice, but she remained perfectly invisible.
She remained perfectly invisible.
When you say invisible, interrupted Albert, it is only to keep up with the mystery.
She remained perfectly invisible.
When you say invisible, interrupted Albert, it is only to keep up with the mystery. For whom do you take the blue domino at the window with the white curtains? Where was this window with white hangings? Asked the Countess. At the Rispoli Palace. The Count had 3 windows at the Rispoli Palace. Yes. Did you pass through the Corso? Yes. Well, did you notice 2 windows hung with yellow damask, and one with white damask with a red cross? Those were the Count's windows. Why, he must be a nabob. Do you know what those 3 windows were worth? 200 or 300 Roman crowns? 2,000 or 3,000. Goodness! Does this island procure him such a revenue? It does not bring him a single piastre. Then why did he purchase it? For a whim. He is an original, then. In reality, observed Albert, he seemed to me somewhat eccentric. Were he at Paris?
An original, then.
By original, she means new money, which is frowned upon for some inalienable reasons, because everybody who has money, the original money, always comes from crime. Always comes from crime. Nobody made their first million, honestly. Not a single person. Okay, here we go. Tear down the establishment, kill the bourgeois.
He is an original, then.
In reality, observed Albert, he seemed to me somewhat eccentric. Were he at Paris and a frequenter of the theaters, I should say he was a poor devil, literally mad. At this moment, a fresh visitor entered, and, according to custom, Franz gave up his seat to him. This circumstance had, moreover, the effect of changing the conversation. An hour afterwards, the 2 friends returned to their hotel.
Conversation. An hour.
An hour afterwards.
Stance had, moreover, the effect of changing the conversation.
An hour afterwards, the 2 friends returned to their hotel. Signor Pastrini had already set about procuring their disguises for the morrow, and he assured them that they would be perfectly satisfied. The next morning at 9 o'clock he entered Franz's room, followed by a tailor who had 8 or 10 Roman peasant costumes on his arm. They selected 2 exactly alike, and charged the tailor to sew on each of their hats about 20 yards of ribbon, and to procure them the two of the long silk sashes of different colors, with which the lower orders decorate themselves on fete days. Albert was impatient to see how he looked in his new dress. A jacket and breeches of blue velvet, silk stockings with clocks, shoes with buckles, and a silk waistcoat. This picturesque attire set him off to great advantage, and when he had This picturesque attire set him to great advantage. Okay, here we go. This picturesque attire.
With clocks, shoes with buckles, and a silk waistcoat.
This picturesque attire set him off to great advantage, and when he had bound the scarf around his waist, and when his hat, placed coquettishly to one side, let fall on his shoulder a stream of ribbons, Franz was forced to confess that costume has much to do with the physical superiority we accord to certain nations. The Turks used to be so picturesque with their long and flowing robes, but are they not now hideous, with their blue frocks buttoned up to the chin, and their red caps, which make them look like a bottle of wine with a red seal? Franz complimented Albert, who looked at himself in the glass, and with an unequivocal smile of satisfaction. They were thus engaged when the Count of Monte Cristo entered. "Gentlemen," he said, "although a companion is agreeable, perfect freedom is sometimes still more agreeable. I come to say that today and for the remainder of the carnival, I leave the carriage entirely at your disposal. The host will tell you I have 3 or 4 more, so that you will not inconvenience me in any way. Make use of it, I pray you, for your pleasure or your business." The young men wished to decline, but they could find no Still not hitting him right. I will get him.
For your pleasure or your business.
The young men wished to decline, but they could find no good reason for refusing an offer which was so agreeable to them. The Count of Monte Cristo remained a quarter of an hour with them, conversing on all subjects with the greatest ease. He was, as we have already said, perfectly well acquainted with the literature of all countries. A glance at the walls of his salon proved to Franz and Albert that he was a connoisseur of pictures. A few words he let fall. He was a connoisseur of pictures, not motion pictures. We're talking paintings, and probably the artists who paint them. Okay. Connoisseur of pictures.
Albert that he was a connoisseur of pictures.
A few words he let fall showed them that he was no stranger to the sciences, and he seemed much occupied with chemistry. The two friends did not venture to return the Count the breakfast he had given them. It would have been too absurd to offer him in exchange for his excellent table the very inferior one of Signor Pastrini. They told him so frankly, and he received their excuses with the air of a man who appreciated their delicacy. Albert was charmed with the Count's manners.
Who appreciated their delicacy.
Albert was charmed with the Count's manners, and he was only prevented from recognizing him for a perfect gentleman by reason of his varied knowledge. The permission to do what he liked with the carriage pleased him above all, for the fair peasants had appeared in a most elegant carriage the preceding evening, and Albert was not sorry to be upon an equal footing with them. Dang. It's the him and them thing again. I just don't know what the hell happened. Him, our perfect. Equal footing with them. There we go.
An equal footing with him. Carriage the preceding evening.
Okay, let's try that again. It all sounds a little mouthy. Okay, so here we go.
For a perfect gentleman, by reason of his varied knowledge.
The permission to do what he liked with the carriage pleased him above all, for the fair peasants had appeared in a most elegant carriage the preceding evening, and Albert was not sorry to be upon an equal footing with them. At 1:30 they descended. The coachman and footman had put on their livery over their disguises, which gave them a more ridiculous appearance than ever, and which gained them the applause of Franz and Albert. Albert had fastened the faded bunch of violets to his buttonhole. At the first sound of the bell, they hastened into the Corso by the Via Vittoria. At the second turn, a bunch of fresh violets, thrown from a carriage filled with harlequins, indicated to Albert that, like himself and his friends, the peasants had changed their costume also, and whether it was the result of chance or whether a similar feeling had possessed him both. Now I'm just changing them into him, which is great.
Costume also, and with his friends, the peasants.
The peasants. There we go.
Like himself and his friends.
The peasants had changed their costume also, and whether it was the result of chance or whether a similar feeling had possessed them both, while he had donned their costume, they had assumed his. Albert placed the fresh bouquet in his buttonhole, but he kept the faded one in his hand, and when he again met the calash, he raised it to his lips, an action which seemed greatly to amuse not only the fair lady who had thrown it, but her joyous companions also. The day was as gay as the preceding one, perhaps even more animated and noisy. The Count appeared for an instant at his window, but when they again passed he had disappeared. It is almost needless to say that the flirtation between Albert and the fair peasant continued all day. In the evening on his return, Franz. The evening of his return.
Between Albert and the fair peasant continued all day.
In the evening, on his return, Franz found a letter from the embassy, informing him that he would have the honor of being received by His Holiness the next day. At each previous visit he had made to Rome, he had solicited and obtained the same favor, and was incited as much by a religious feeling as by gratitude. He was unwilling to quit the capital of the Christian world without laying his respectful homage at the feet of one of St. Peter's successors, who has set the rare example of all the virtues. He did not then think of the carnival, for in spite of his condescension and touching kindness, one cannot incline oneself without awe before the venerable and noble old man called Gregory XVI. On his belly roll, belly roll, belly roll, belly, belly roll, belly roll, belly roll, belly.
Called Gregory XVI.
On his return from the Vatican, Franz carefully avoided the Corso. He brought away with him a treasure of pious thoughts, to which the mad gaiety of the maskers would have been profanation. At 5:10, Albert entered overjoyed. The harlequin had reassumed her peasant's costume, and as she passed, she raised her mask. She was charming. Franz congratulated Albert, who received his congratulations with the air of a man conscious that they are merited. He had recognized her by certain unmistakable signs, that his fair flirtation belonged to the aristocracy. He made up his mind to write to her the next day. Franz remarked, while he gave these details, that Albert seemed to have something to ask of him, but that he was unwilling to ask it. He insisted upon it, declaring beforehand that he was willing to make any sacrifice the other wished. Albert let himself be pressed just as long as friendship required, and then avowed to Franz that he would do him a great favor by allowing him to occupy the carriage alone the next day. Albert attributed to Franz's absence the extreme kindness of the fair peasant in raising her mask. Franz was not sufficiently egotistical to stop Albert in the middle of an adventure that promised to prove so agreeable to his curiosity and so flattering to his vanity. He felt assured that the perfect indiscretion of his friend would duly inform him of all that happened. And as, during 3 years that he had traveled all over Italy, a similar piece of good fortune had never fallen to his share, Franz was by no means sorry to learn how to act on such an occasion. He therefore promised Albert that he could content himself the morrow with witnessing the carnival from the windows of the Rispoli Palace. Bang. Okay. So, what have we learned today from the Count of Monte Cristo? So the boys went out. They had a good time at the carnival. Albert's a little thirsty. He flirts with a girl dressed as a peasant. She sends him a violet. Then, when coming back, they dress up in different outfits. The girl's dressed as a harlequin, Albert dressed as a peasant. She also sends him another violet. I think she's flirting with him. I think he's very excited. So he decides to take the carriage all by himself to carnival the next day so that he can be alone with the flirtatious girl. Now, does that seem like a good idea? Probably not. Will we find out on Monday? We probably will. Thank you for hanging out, guys, and this is halfway through chapter 36 of The Count of